Hey there, I'm glad you're here for the final week of the series that took us through Genesis to now my very favorite person in this book, Joseph, son of Jacob. All these ancient stories that hold timeless truth. It's an incredible story that Steve Ingold will unpack for us today. And it's the final weekend in Women's History Month, and there's no better way today to mark that than to imagine a world, okay, without these crucial inventions that have become ubiquitous in our lives. Inventions by women. Frequency hopping, which is the foundation of modern Wi-Fi. Voice over IP, which allows us to Zoom one another. Or how about the paper grocery bag, or the paper coffee filter, windshield wipers, GPS, dishwashers. Dishwashers, you guys. Our dishwasher once broke, and there's like 5 people in the house. Thank you, God, for these incredible women, and let's celebrate them. Hey, a quick question. Did you participate in neighborhood church online, or did you actually attend neighborhood church in person in a home near your house, or a house near your home? Not sure how to say it. Wasn't that a blast? Don't miss out next time, as all of us at Cornerstone Fellowship meet in homes every second Sunday of the month, or Saturdays online, and our website has all the information. And please plan to stick with us again next week for a Palm Sunday, leading into Holy Week, culminating in Easter. You guys, we're almost there. Our website, again, has all the information. And thank you to all of our supporters. None of what we do would be possible without your generous donations. The hundreds and hundreds of recurring givers are truly the lifeblood of Cornerstone, and I cannot thank you enough. And now let's hand the microphone to Steve Ingold for the next message in Genesis. Welcome to Cornerstone Fellowship.
In our 5 sessions through the book of Genesis, we've worked through 35 chapters of Genesis. We know we didn't cover everything, and we knew we wouldn't be able to. We didn't get into the topics and issues that initiate heated debates on Facebook, things like evolution, the Big Bang Theory, and how to explain the existence of dinosaurs. But our intention was never to answer those questions. Instead, our sincere hope was that we would compel all of us to read Genesis as an ancient story, and to discover that Genesis was never written to answer those sorts of questions. Genesis was written to answer ancient questions for ancient Israelites. And our goal was to recognize the themes of the stories, the history, the context, and how the beginning of the Israelite story might help us learn more about the God we serve today. In doing so, we've covered everything from Adam to Abel to Noah to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you may have noticed how frequently we have discussed how many of those names were the younger brother within their own families, while the older brothers seemed to get displaced and looked over: Cain, Ishmael, Esau. And in our text for today, we meet yet another younger brother as a central character within the story: Joseph, the 11th of 12 sons of Jacob. And Joseph played a crucial role in the survival of the ancient Israelites. And maybe you've heard of Joseph before. As I was growing up in a Christian home, Joseph was the star of plenty of Bible picture stories, coloring books, flannel graphs. If you don't know what flannel graphs are, you're not missing much. And even Broadway productions. I think we saw the play Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat about a dozen times as a child. But for as much as this part of the ancient story focuses on Joseph, it's really about what happened to the line of Jacob, now named Israel, as we learned last time. Because Genesis is the story of the beginning of Israel. Now, Joseph is not without his flaws, but like many others we've learned about, he is still a massive part of God's plan, even though it's hard to see how that could be true from the beginning of his story, because Joseph seems like a brat, like many younger siblings are. My younger sister, Brittany, carries with her 2 nicknames to this day: Brattany and Brit Brat. We don't need to talk about who gave her those monikers, though, but it seems like Joseph's brothers felt the same way about him. He was obviously his dad's favorite. He was gifted a beautiful robe that he flaunted in front of his brothers, and even displays one of the main characteristics of a younger sibling. He's a tattletale. So his brothers don't like him. They hate Joseph. And I hope the theme of sibling rivalry has been very apparent to you. It seems as if Israel's national history is one big sibling rivalry event. The 12 sons of Jacob eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel, and guess what? They don't get along at all. And it starts early. Like I said, Joseph's brothers can't stand him, and it doesn't seem like Joseph is trying to win them over in any way. Actually, he has 2 dreams he's sure to tell them about, and in these 2 dreams, he receives the same message: I will rule over my brothers. Now, our 3-year-old Zekiah has adopted a new phrase that he loves to repeat over and over and over. He says, "That's not fair." When his older brother Jericho gets to play baseball or basketball or go golfing with dad, it's almost automatic. That's not fair. Somehow at 3, he has this very clear idea of what justice looks like. And I get it. It's a bummer he isn't old enough to play Little League or CYO or spend time golfing with dad. But he's too young to do those things. Now, if the roles were reversed and Zekiah got to do all of the things that all of those things, and Jericho felt like that was unfair, then I'd have to agree with Jericho. There would be no reason he shouldn't have the right to do the things that an 11-year-old wants to do. I mean, how do you feel if you don't get what is rightfully yours? What emotions and feelings pop up when you don't receive what you deserve? I imagine they aren't joyful, peace-filled feelings. Which is the same reason why all these older brothers throughout Genesis feel mistreated or overlooked. In ancient times, it was assumed the oldest son would get the birthright with all of the special privileges, inheritance, and authority. But they are constantly tricked, coerced, or forced out of what is rightfully theirs. And no wonder Joseph's 10 older brothers, he has one younger brother, Benjamin, no wonder his 10 older brothers hate him and even get to the point where one day when they see him coming from a distance, say this in verse 19 and 20 of Genesis 37. You can go ahead and turn there with me now. Genesis 37 verses 19 and 20. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." And this just got intense real quick. It's at this point in the story where I believe Joseph could begin making the claim, that's not fair. And I want to pause here for a moment because Joseph is about to face some adversity of his own. His brothers have already faced adversity in the sense that they were passed up for the birthright and vengeance is how they respond. But this is the first of many moments where Joseph will be faced with some adversity of his own. If you're anything like me, one of the reasons we respect the people we respect the most is their response to adversity. Those we respect most are generally people who have walked through difficult times and painful situations and handled them with grace, mercy, and dignity. We respect people who've been hurt but don't hurt back. Those who were treated unjustly or unfairly and didn't attack back. Those who faced extraordinary health challenges but didn't lose their love for life. It's like you can almost see their suffering redeemed in real time because of their response. So, how does Joseph respond to adversity? How does he respond when things don't seem to be fair? Well, let's learn more about what happens to Joseph to find out. Now, fortunately for Joseph, his older brother Reuben urges his other brothers not to take Joseph's life. And they agree, and they take his robe and throw him into a cistern without killing him. When some Ishmaelite traders pass by on the way to Egypt, the brothers sell Joseph to them. They get some cash and get rid of their annoying brother. Win-win for them. They tell their father Jacob that he was ripped apart by wild animals, and Jacob is devastated. His favorite son is dead. But Jacob is unaware that his son is actually alive and is on his way to Egypt to be sold to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's high-ranking officials. Joseph quickly becomes a trusted man for Potiphar. Here's what we read in Genesis 39. Flip a couple chapters over. 39 starting in verse 4. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all of that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. It sounds like Joseph's got a pretty good deal going on. Unfortunately, some more adversity is about to strike. Apparently, Joseph is a pretty good-looking dude because Potiphar's wife has a thing for him. And such a thing that one day while they're alone in the house, she tries to seduce him. But Joseph refuses. During all of this attempted seduction, Potiphar's wife gets a good hold of his cloak, and when Joseph turns to run away, he leaves his cloak firmly in her grasp. So first the robe from his dad, and now this, the dude just can't seem to hang on to his clothes. Potiphar's wife uses Joseph's cloak as proof for the lie that it was actually Joseph who seduced her. Potiphar believes his wife's lie and throws Joseph in jail. Again, Joseph could be saying, that's not fair. But while Joseph was in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. While he's in prison, the Lord is with him. While he was punished for doing something he wouldn't do and didn't do, God is with him. While he's being treated unjustly, God is with Joseph. Do you ever have moments where you want to say, God, where are you? And God says, I'm right here with you. But it doesn't feel like God is right there with you, so we still say, where are you? And God responds, I'm right here with you. I imagine this is what is going on for Joseph. But even still, we read that while Joseph was in prison, the Lord was with him and God showed him kindness. Now, the word translated kindness in our English text, in Hebrew, it actually means loving kindness. It's a covenant word. And throughout most of our English Old Testament, it's translated loving kindness. And the implication is that Joseph considered himself in some sort of a covenant relationship with a God who had seemingly done nothing for him lately. So what did this loving kindness look like? Well, go back to the verse we just read. He granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden, which is confusing. Because if God is with you and God is for you, why do you have any sort of relationship with a prison warden? If God is with you and for you, then you're not in prison, especially not for something you didn't even do. That's definitely not fair. But his story goes on. Remember, Joseph has an interesting connection with dreams. In ancient days, the ability to interpret dreams was extremely valuable. And it just so happens that while Joseph is in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker both have dreams they don't understand. So Joseph interprets the dreams. He tells the cupbearer that he will be restored to Pharaoh's good graces and tells the baker that his head will get chopped off and his body impaled on a pole, which will become bird food. We don't learn whether or not anyone else was there, but I don't think after the baker's interpretation, anyone else was like, hey, could you interpret my dream next? Well, it turns out both dreams came true. And Joseph asked the cupbearer to put in a good word for him with Pharaoh. But the cupbearer forgets. Again, that's not fair. At least until Pharaoh starts having some dreams of his own. Dreams about 7 fat cows getting eaten by 7 skinny cows and 7 fat stalks of wheat getting eaten by 7 skinny stalks of wheat. And Pharaoh is freaked out. His own magicians don't know what the dreams mean, even though that's their job. And the cupbearer overhears all this and all of a sudden goes, oh yeah, I was in prison. We don't need to worry about why. We're good, Pharaoh. But I was in prison with this Hebrew guy who nails it when it comes to interpreting dreams. So Pharaoh sends for Joseph and says, I hear you can interpret dreams. And Joseph says, actually, God is the one who does the interpreting. I'm just the messenger. Seems like he's learned a little bit of humility in prison. So Pharaoh tells Joseph about his dreams, and Joseph knows right away exactly what they mean. Egypt will have 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. And the famine will be much worse than the abundant years. And then Joseph does the unthinkable right after this. He leans in and begins to tell Pharaoh what to do. He begins to advise Pharaoh, and he says, Pharaoh, here's what you need to do. You need to appoint somebody and put them in charge of this problem. There needs to be somebody who wakes up every single day focused on solving this problem and preparing Egypt during the 7 years of plenty for the 7 years of famine. So Joseph, a Hebrew prisoner, saves Egypt from destruction. Now, this should prompt some of the promise we've learned about throughout Genesis. The Israelites will be a blessing to the nations. Here, Joseph is a blessing to Egypt. Now, several generations later, those same Egyptians would turn on the Hebrews and enslave them. But we'll save that story for when we go through Exodus later on this year. So, back to Joseph. Joseph is then promoted from prisoner to Pharaoh's right-hand man in charge of preparing for the famine. And Jacob and the rest of his family are still back in Canaan. When the famine hits Jacob really hard, he sends his remaining sons, except for his youngest, Benjamin, his new favorite, he sends them to Egypt to try and buy some grain. Now, if you remember, Abraham also went to Egypt back in Genesis 12 because of a famine. And just like in that story, when Sarah is a guest in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers are now a guest in Pharaoh's house. This will also come up again in Exodus when we get there, when the Israelites are slaves to Pharaoh. So Joseph's brothers come to Egypt, and guess who they have to meet up with? Yup, Joseph. He recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. Instead, they bow down and worship him, just like the dream he told them about years ago. But this ancient story isn't about payback. There's a deeper lesson the author wants the readers to learn. Now, that's not to say Joseph handled this all with complete grace and compassion. Instead of revealing who he is, he accuses them of spying and tells them to bring back their youngest brother. And the brothers know that their father will absolutely hate this idea. Jacob's already lost one son and will be adamantly opposed to losing his next favorite child. But the famine is so severe that Jacob has to relent. He sends Benjamin with his other sons, and they end up having a great time in Egypt. But Joseph isn't done yet. When he sends them off with as much grain as they can carry, he hides a silver cup in Benjamin's bag and is about to accuse them of stealing it. Joseph's men catch up with them and arrest them for stealing the cup. The brothers say they aren't guilty, but it is announced that whoever had possession of the cup will be sent back to Egypt to be enslaved. Think about this. Joseph is literally reenacting his own story with the other favorite son while the brothers hopelessly watch it all unfold. So they decide to go to Joseph and beg for mercy because they know that losing another son might actually kill their father. Fortunately for his brothers, Joseph feels he has punished them enough. He reveals his identity, and they stand in utter disbelief. And in a statement of forgiveness, he tells his brothers that all of this was God's plan all along. Look at Genesis 45, verse 7. But God sent me ahead of you. This is Joseph talking. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. This right here is what the author really wanted to convey to the audience. If you change a few words of these two verses, it would be very applicable to the Israelites after the Exodus and after their return from Babylonian exile. God is with us. God preserved us. He delivered us, and he will continue to do so, even though things don't feel fair. Overjoyed, Joseph sends his brothers back, and Pharaoh invites Joseph's entire family to join him in Egypt, giving them the best land available. Jacob hears the news and is beside himself, stunned and absolutely overcome with joy. Joseph is alive. Now, all of the Israelites migrate to Egypt and remain there as we end the story of Genesis. And they do really well in Egypt. Genesis 47:27, we read this. Now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Now, after everything we have seen, after every mistake they made, God is still with the Israelites, blessing them and increasing their number, which is right in line with the ancient command that we started off with way back in Genesis 1, verse 28. As Genesis wraps up, Jacob, nearing death, blesses his son Judah, and in verse 10 of chapter 49 shares a blessing that points ahead to a king on whom all Israel's hopes will be placed. First, King David, but also traditionally understood to be referencing the one true king, Jesus. But there's one more little snag. Eventually, Jacob dies, and once they buried Jacob and had this elaborate funeral, they all come back to the land of Egypt, and the 10 brothers who sold Joseph into slavery get together, and they think, man, you know what? Maybe Joseph was just waiting for our father to die before he exacts his revenge. His brothers are taking on the posture of victims once again, something their brother Joseph easily could have done throughout his life. And so they go to Joseph, and the text says his brothers came to him and they threw themselves down before him, proclaiming, "We are your slaves." But Joseph said to them, Genesis 50, chapter 50, verse 19. Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God?" Am I in the place of God? Like, guys, don't you understand? God was in this. God worked through this. Am I in the place of God? The Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, this verse is written this way: "Do not be afraid, for I am God's." And what an incredible response. It's the response of someone who is confident God is with them. Throughout Joseph's story, being sold off into slavery, in prison, all of it, everything that happened that just didn't seem fair, Joseph was keenly aware of God's presence in his life. His response to adversity would be a lesson for all of God's people moving forward. There are circumstances we will face that will be less than ideal. Adversity we will come up against that won't feel fair, but God is with us. It's a theme that runs throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament. God is with us. And maybe this is what you needed to hear today. God is with us. But let's take that one step further. I want to ask you a question. How would someone in your current circumstance respond if they were confident God was with them? I mean, Joseph could have constantly repeated the phrase, my son Zekiah loves so much. The Israelites throughout their history could have responded with the same phrase as well. It's not fair. I mean, Joseph had every right to play the part of victim, but how did he respond? How did this one man's response serve as an example to the Israelites and to us today? He was confident God was with him. He even told his brothers, "You intended to harm me." Verse 20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, for the saving of many lives." God's intention for the Israelites became a reality through one man's circumstance-defying response. God is with us. He overcame the victim mindset. Clint Rutledge, one of our Brentwood pastors, shared an article with me about overcoming the victim mindset, and I think there are some helpful tools we can draw out of it. Things like, when we face difficult situations, things like forgive others, forgive yourself, spend time praying through and releasing your circumstances to God, stop making excuses, and take action. The reality is that things may not be fair, but that reality does not impact our ability to respond in a healthy way. You know, it's so interesting how often our responses are coerced by what we believe is fair or just for us. The brothers feeling slighted by the favoritism Joseph was shown caused them to respond with evil and malice. Joseph, on the other hand, seemed to have a view of more than just him, as if he held onto the promise made generations before him that Israel was going to be blessed and would be a blessing to others. You see, I think this is something important we have to understand about blessing and God's intention for Israel from the beginning. Blessing is primarily not about what God is going to do to someone. Blessing is primarily about what God is going to do through someone. Or maybe another way to say it, blessing is what happens through you in the midst of what is happening to you. You know, it's so easy to get caught up with what's happening to us and miss what could happen through us. It's also easy to become so self-focused that we remove God from the situation altogether and miss the fact that it is God who is with us, working and moving through us. So, what about us? How do we view God's presence with us in difficult circumstances? Is blessing just about me, or is it about more than me? Is Jesus leading us toward empathy, compassion, and justice for more than just me, or are we more inclined to play the victim? Is the loving kindness of God something we are waiting to happen to us, or is his loving kindness working through us? Are we more concerned with what should be ours or whose we are? Do we care more about what is rightfully ours, what we rightfully deserve, what is fair for me, or are we responding out of the presence of God within us? I hope you'll sit with some of those questions this week. You know, in his letter to the church in Corinth, Paul wrote this: I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Joseph's response led to the good of others. That's how someone who is confident in God's presence responds to adversity. Someone who is absolutely confident there is more to their circumstances than meets the eye. That their current situation is not the whole story. They're simply part of a much bigger story that God is redeeming and restoring. Remember, blessing is primarily about what happens through you, not what happens to you. So again, let me ask, how would someone in your current circumstance, whatever situation you're going through right now, whatever you're dealing with, how would someone in your current circumstance respond if they were confident God was with them? I'll close with this. I can't help but read this story about Joseph and think about my dad. My dad has been battling renal cancer for 7.5 years. He is one of the most Christ-centered, surrendered, humble, kind, compassionate, I could go on and on, people that I've ever met. I respect him so much. And if there is anyone who doesn't deserve to get cancer and go through all of the painful treatments and the side effects of those treatments, it's my dad. But from the moment he received his diagnosis, I have yet to hear him proclaim, "That's not fair," because of what he has endured. Not once has he acted like the victim of the cancer that he has. There was one time he did whine a little bit, actually. It was right after he had a tumor removed and was still pretty drugged up. I walked into his hospital room and asked how he was feeling, and he said, "Getting old sucks." But in that same conversation, he also promised to leave my mom and dad's house to me and not my sister whenever that time comes. He claims he doesn't recall any of that, so I'd say that in his right state of mind, he's never complained. Actually, my dad would go as far as to say that his cancer is a blessing. There are countless people that have watched how my dad has responded to the adversity of everything he has gone through, and it has drawn them closer to God. They experienced Jesus through my dad. They've experienced blessing through my dad, and that brings him so much joy. Now, throughout my life, I've told people that if I can be half the man my dad is, then I'll feel like I did all right. But watching him respond to adversity, to what does not seem fair at all, I'm just hoping I can somehow learn from and live out a fraction of the legacy that's been left for me. That when things feel unfair, I can consider the blessing of what God might want to do through me, regardless of what is happening to me. The same lesson these ancient Israelites were being implored to hold on to. Well, that pretty much wraps up Genesis. A story of struggle with God and others, but also a story of Israel's faith in God regardless of circumstances, trusting that God comes through no matter what. The book ends with the death of Jacob and then Joseph, signaling the end of Israel's infancy, with a difficult period of growth ahead. And if it feels like Genesis just kind of leaves us hanging and doesn't get wrapped up with a nice conclusion, you're not wrong. But that's the role Genesis plays in the story of Israel. It's just the beginning. I hope and pray that some of the themes we brought out from the text stick with you, that you read and discover with a new perspective. And I really hope that we continue to move forward as a church, compelled by the words and actions of Jesus to fulfill the ancient promise, to be a blessing to anyone we come across. Let's pray. Father God, I think the reason when I look at Joseph's story and I think about my dad and all the things that we're learning from this, the reason I respect my dad so much is because of how he's responded to adversity. It makes me respect Joseph's response to adversity throughout the story. And God, I hope and pray that we would be a church, a community of people that would respond to adversity with a desire to be a blessing to others. God, I hope and pray and ask and beg and plead that we would be that church, that we would be a church that is so surrendered and so selfless and so humble and so merciful. That we don't look at our circumstances as defining moments, but opportunities. Opportunities to be a blessing, opportunities to show love, grace, mercy, and compassion. God, lead us, lead your church to fulfill the ancient promise that you left for your people. God, we love you, we adore you, we praise you, we honor you, and we pray all of this in the matchless, powerful, beautiful name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Well, we've come to the end of our Genesis series. It only took us 6 weeks ago, 800 chapters or something like that.
50
chapters in 6 weeks. That's pretty good. I'm a little tired.
I'm exhausted.
It's a lot. Hey, listen, great job today talking about the story of Joseph. And since you've been steeping in the story of Joseph, I've got a question here for you, okay?
Bring it.
So if Joseph were living today, how do you think he would use social media to share these dreams and experiences? Is
this a serious question?
Yes.
Right now?
Would he still face the same sibling rivalry, or would it play out differently in a digital age?
No, he'd be so much more in trouble. I don't think there's any cisterns to throw him into, but he would present himself on TikTok if that's still around, Facebook, X, all the things. His brothers would be furious. There'd be a lot of what's the term when you
doxing?
Gaslighting, doxing. There's one where it's a lot of subtweets.
A lot of subtweets.
Oh
yes,
that's happening. I don't even know what. Is that really? You wrote that down?
Yeah, I wrote that down.
You wrote words down like
that. Anyway. Just to get us started, because the other questions around that are pretty serious. How Joseph faced unbelievable adversity for years, decades of his young life. Can you share a time? And I don't want to compare you to Joseph, but can you share a time when your adversity or adversity in your life strengthened your faith, when you felt God's presence during a particularly challenging period in your life? Maybe you think about, COVID, something recent or something long ago.
Yeah, I mean, the low-hanging fruit for me is our adoption process, but I talk about that all the time, so I was trying to think of something different.
We're a little bored about that.
Yeah, it's so
I'm
boring
just kidding.
that we brought that beautiful kid home,
I know.
monster home. No, but I think that's the one that always holds true when it comes to adversity, because we really thought we were never getting a kid. When you're in a process for 6 years and it's not happening, that thing's not coming true, it's like, all right, I guess it is what it is, and you.
And not to belabor that, but did either one of you have dreams where you kind of had an idea of where this could go? Or?
No, we didn't have dreams. I think Amanda had. I mean, we had dreams in the sense of envisioning what our family could be, but not literal dreams.
Okay.
I think Amanda had a lot of moments where she was just literally in the closet praying, pleading, begging God to come through and help us adopt a kid, but yeah, that was a really tumultuous season where you're questioning so much about God and so much about, it's I think we're good at this parenting thing. Jericho seemed to be okay. He's functional sometimes. No, he's great, and I think it's what is it that's not allowing us to do this? And so yeah, that would probably be it for me.
That's a lot of adversity. I agree.
And then if you don't mind, watching my dad go through, my dad's my hero, and watching him get cancer was miserable and is miserable. Like the moments where he can't, when you recognize the mortality of people you love, that you always just saw as like, they would be there forever.
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks. That's not fun.
So difficult. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
This is a really great,
Our therapy session here.
great time together. You mentioned that blessings are about what God intends to do through someone, not just to someone. And how can we as a community, as a congregation, shift our focus from seeking personal blessings to becoming these conduits that you talk about, these conduits of blessing others?
Yeah.
Using Joseph's story, using the story of other saints?
Yeah, I think the big thing is first, like, I think I said this in the sermon, is to not remove God from the situation. Because we ultimately make blessing about us, and it's not about us. It's about God, what God's doing, how God's working. And so if something happens to me, which it's still a thing, it's just not primarily about that. So if God blesses us, that's God doing that work. If God's going to use us through adversity or through whatever difficult circumstances we're in, that's still God doing the work. And so often we have this mindset of like, I'm going to hunker down, I'm going to push through, I'm going to make it happen, and we remove God from the situation. I think it's the idea, like our value of sharing advantage is one that comes to mind right away. Any advantage we have, we share with people without those advantages. Having this selfless, surrendered, humble approach to, hopeful approach to people we come across and interact with. I think it's so much the story of this. This entire story, cover to cover, is about so much about it's not about you, and it's like even when we get to the New Testament, it's about death to self and laying down your life for your friends, and like that's a big part of it. So I think holding on to those things and having that perspective when we're going through trial is like, how could God use this to bless someone else, is huge. So.
And it's about, when it's not about you and it's about someone else, again, we have to do life in community. It's one of our main values. We do life in community. We can't just sit in a pew. We can't just sit online and watch a video or watch somebody, teach a lesson. We have to share what God's doing in your life. We have to be open to listen to what God is doing in others, and do this together in community. That's where all the riches come. That's when the blessings come through you to others. And so I hope that you will join us. Take that step to perhaps click a link and into the chat, or say something, or connect with us in Neighborhood Church, online or in person. We want that for you because we see so much richness for you in those situations. So I'm so glad you were here for Genesis, all six parts. If you missed one, go over to our YouTube channel and check out what you missed. I'm so glad you were here. Hope to see you next time.